I'm good. I'm good. I think
Nearly
we got the ti
midnight.
I think we got the timing a little wrong because I think
Seriously?
uh yeah, because I feel like it was 10 p.m. on my end, but I think it might be 9:45. Like it's fine.
Oh,
It's okay.
oh, that's a bit because that's why whenever we have speakers from outside India, I'm asking them to give me the time based on
I know, I
Indian time.
know. It's all good. It's all good.
Just to
Happens
not
all the
mess it
time.
up from my end.
No, no,
We
this is
are
fine.
live in less than a minute. So please, we are live now. Just give me few seconds to send the link to all our speakers and everything, and then we can start. Mm. The live link is also with you in the pre-session. So all instructions at the background, I will be sending in our core group of coordination while the session is on. So keep a check on that. Yeah. So all set, all three of you, shall I start the recording and go for it? Yeah.
Yes.
I need a glass of water before I start. Just give me a second. Nilanjana, I'm also making you co-host so that when I'm speaking, you can have some take charge of letting people in. Okay. And now I also have my researchers. So Stacy, you are also co-host. Good evening, good afternoon. Warm greetings on behalf of W4W Foundation, a think tank instituted as Citizens Collective. We welcome you to another session of Wednesdays for Water. We have crossed 200 sessions, to be honest, and very proud to share with you the objective of Wednesdays for Water is to engage in conversations with water experts, grassroots practitioners, policy makers, and youth to explore the complex intertwined issues associated with water and the possible solutions they are working on and seeking forth. With the success of Wednesdays for Water, we have actually expanded it to Friday Waters, which has 4 sessions: reading club, thesis club, water arts, water talkies. And we recently concluded Monday Munching and Musing with Women for Water. These are all online sessions amounting to more than 450 sessions, making us one of the longest water conversations ever taken place. In addition, we also organize water workshops, water walks and talks, seminars, special courses, and conference panels to continue the water conversation in various possible ways. At W4W, we believe water conversations are the way towards water conservation. Interestingly, the success of Wednesdays for Water also tells that our foundation is called Wednesdays for Water. So I would like to make this announcement once again that we are We for Water and not Wednesdays for Water. Wednesdays for Water is our signature initiative. Today we are discussing challenging false climate solutions for Himalayan water future. We know every year we are seeing different kinds of climate issues, different kinds of water issues, deforestation issues, development issues, and different narratives set by different stakeholders. I'm not going to take much time on what's going on there. but at the moment, parts of Himalayan region are under flood and lake outburst and other things. But we have a set of wonderful speakers to talk about what's going on there. And I would like to invite them, first of all, with a deep gratitude for their time and agreeing to do this. And I will actually invite our discussant today first, and she will take the session forward. So first of all, big thanks to Ritodi Chakravarti, who is our main speaker, and Mansi Ashar, also our co-speaker, who will do the answering to Nilanjana. And thanks, Ritodi, for organizing this session, bringing them together. And thanks, Mansi. Welcome back to Wednesdays for Water. So I'll introduce Nilanjana and hand it over to her to take the session further. Nilanjana Sen is an ethnographer and development practitioner whose work examines youth agency, ethics, and everyday decision making. Her research and professional experience spans the Western Himalayas, governance and policy work in Haryana, and corporate social responsibility. She is currently co-directing a documentary in the Western Himalayas, building on years of ethnographic fieldwork in the region. Nilanjana holds a PhD in human geography from the University of Melbourne, along with master's degree from King's College London and South Asian University. Thank you so much, Nilanjana, for taking charge to run this show, and I'm really relieved and very happy to have you over. Over to you, and the floor is yours. The screen is yours, sorry.
Thanks, Mansi. Good afternoon, good evening, everyone. It is my great pleasure to facilitate this discussion today on challenging false climate solutions for Himalayan water futures. As Mansi already mentioned, we have two incredible thinkers and practitioners with us today, Mansi Ashar and Dr. Rituri Chakravarti. Manshi is an environmental justice activist and researcher. Since 1998, she has worked with organizations, alliances, and campaigns on issues of land, water, and forest rights. She has extensively documented and written on the political ecology and political economy of neoliberal development policies, particularly in the Himalayan region. In 2010, she co founded Himdhara, an autonomous collective in Himachal Pradesh that supports and builds solidarity with community movements working to protect livelihoods and landscapes. I've also had the privilege and opportunity of following Manshi's work for many years now. I'm very excited to hear you today. We also have with us Dr. Rituri Chakravarti, who is a broadly trained environmental social scientist. Over the past decade, he has collaborated with rural and indigenous communities across India, Bhutan, China, and New Zealand on issues of youth migration, agrarian political economy, masculinity, and the politics of climate adaptation. He's currently developing a suite of climate justice tools focused on justice for climate change, equity, and
I think we have lost connection with Nilanjana. So I
this
will.
work is being
Nilanjana.
developed
Oh,
through the
she's back.
knowledge just.
Yeah, she's
Hello?
back. Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead, Nilanjana. There was a sound lapse. Yeah.
Okay, so this work is being developed through the Knowledge Justice Collective, an international group of Indigenous scholars and practitioners that he co-leads with Dr. Pasang Sherpa at UBC. A very warm welcome, Ritadi. So before we delve into the conversation today, I will briefly set the context. Even Mansi did that, but just a little more detail. So, across the Himalayas, there is by now a growing number of initiatives that are responding to climate related challenges. These range from floods, unpredictable rainfall, to droughts and glacial lake outbursts. Many of these responses rely on scientific expertise, technology, and large scale interventions. The discussion today will engage with an important concern whether every intervention presented as a climate solution actually helps the people and environments it is intended to help. Some interventions can have unintended consequences, and in some cases, we've seen that it can actually make matters worse. There are a few concerns that will be at the heart of our discussion today. The first is knowledge. Local and indigenous communities have, for generations, had experience of understanding their landscape and water systems, but often this knowledge is given less importance than that of outside experts. A related concern to this is often decision making then. Climate and disaster response can often be designed in a way that it has a very top down approach, sometimes which weakens the community based way of managing resources and responding to disasters. And finally, what we're also seeing is that there is a lot of money that is flowing into climate related projects. And that brings us to the question of climate finance, which will be discussed today. As more money flows into climate related projects, we need to ask who decides who gets funded, whose interests shape these decisions, and who ultimately benefits. We hope that today's discussion will help us look beyond whether a climate intervention is simply technically presented as a solution and ask whose knowledge shapes it, who makes the decisions, who benefits, and what happens to communities and ecosystems as a result. We might also come across many new questions and we might come across many new answers as well. But this is the broad outline that I have for today's discussion. So now I will begin with my first question that deals with the question of knowledge. And I would like to put this across first to Ritadi and then Manshi. When we have been talking about responding to climate change in the Himalayas, we're often thinking about scientific data, technology, and outside expertise. But there is a great deal of knowledge, as I mentioned right away, that that communities are holding, and they've lived with their landscape for years on end, and water systems for generations. Where do you both see this tension between local knowledge and external expertise playing out in the Himalayan water management system? And what might we lose when local knowledge is pushed to the margins? Ritadi, over to you to begin with.
Well, thank you everybody for coming today. Thank you so much, Nilanjana, for that wonderful introduction, and Mansi again for inviting me to be a part of this really incredible initiative. And thank you, Mansi Asher, as well, for being my collaborator on this. So before I answer that question, Nilanjana, one thing, I don't know if you guys have already talked a little bit about this, but a key issue that often needs to be separated out is the impacts of climate change and the solutions of climate change. You know, there's a lot of work now in this area that shows that sometimes the impacts of the climate solution, they mimic the impacts of climate change. So, one of the best examples is given by Camelia Diwan in her work in Mistreating the Bengal Delta, where it shows that shrimp farming, which has been pushed for decades as an climate resilient solution, it essentially incentivizes farmers to flood their fields with saline water, thereby increasing the salinity. And, in many ways, in many instances, farmers actually break the natural polders, the natural embankments that kind of keep out the seawater, just so that they can um, flood just so that they can flood their fields with that water so that they can grow the shrimp, which then they can use as a form of right. So one of the things that uh, is very important to do is sort of divide out this question around, there's a lot of research now on showing people that the impacts of climate change are actually happening, and the
Sorry,
impacts of
Ritodi. I have to
yes.
interrupt here because your audio is very low. So I wonder if other people are hearing him right, or it is from my end. Uh, because the recording is happening from my end, so it should be better from to me also. Is everyone hearing him loud and clear?
The voice went down after a while, but
Yes.
still audible, still audible.
Yes. So if you can do something about it, Rituti, can you
Hello,
speak
can you
now?
hear me now?
Yeah, we hear you now, and it is
Is
also good.
Yes, yes.
Yes, better, much better. Yeah, thank you.
is it better?
Yes, much better.
Okay. Yeah.
Thanks. Please continue.
So yeah. No, what I was saying is that there needs to be that there essentially needs to be that the impacts of climate change and the solutions of climate change, both of those need a lot of research in terms of how do we understand them, right? So the truth is that if you look at the amount of scholarship, scientific scholarship, most of it is actually focused on still, in many ways, increasing the volume of data that can be produced around what impacts of climate change are. We still don't have that same volume of information being produced for the solutions that need to be developed for climate change. Now, often I think when people talk about climate change, they kind of mix these two things without realizing that a lot of climate solutions are actually repurposed development solutions. So, 10 years ago when I was working in Uttarakhand, for example, again, this is a really great metaphor that Camelia uses in her book, which again, I would suggest everybody reads. It's one of the best books written about climate change in South Asia. And one of the metaphors she uses is that a lot of development agencies as well as nonprofits are now sprinkling climate change like a spice on development projects. They are doing that in order to make their projects lucrative to funders. 10 years ago, this was gender, right? So if you said anything to do with gender, your project would get funded. Today, even though the issues have not changed, right, we still have the same structural issues around casteism, patriarchy, around long-term effects of colonial land management, around hyper-capitalist incursions into communal markets. All of that is being subsumed under this broad umbrella of climate change, right? So this is very different from the actual emerging impacts of climate change, right? So for example, we were just sharing this paper between us. Mansi shared this with me today, showing how the Western Himalaya are actually warming faster than the Eastern Himalaya. Now, I don't deny this fact. It very well could be true. But the issue is, I was just looking up the paper, right? This was produced by this team from BITS Pilani. They used this long-term, hydromet modeling. They did, a lot of satellite triangulation. They did a lot of things which are all best practice in climatology. But my point is that if you see that report, there isn't a single data point that's from communal knowledge. How did they verify all of this? How did they bring this down to earth? Like we have this saying in mixed methods research in climate change saying, can we bring the satellites down to earth, right? Because again, the issue is that both when it comes to the production of climate change data and the production of knowledge around what our solutions should look like. In both of those spheres, what we see is the categorization of communal knowledge as merely descriptive, right? Now, this means something. What does this mean? It means that when we enter a community as researchers, as scientists, as experts, what have you, the role of the community is seen as people who describe things to you or who are data providers, right? It's never analytics, right? Which means, for example, I've seen this multiple times, let's say let's say done by ICIMOD or work done by even our Ministry of like Environment and the Himalayan, the HSMHE, whatever that long abbreviation is. The where what they do is they take, let's say, they talk to some nomadic herders, right? They get oral history from our ST herders that are in the Trans Himalaya. Then they'll get some data from a satellite. Then they'll run a model, or use current best practice climate modeling data, let's say from an array like CMIP6, then they will look at, let's say, regional rainfall data. Then they will kind of shove it all together under one analytical frame. Now, the issue is that that is often done because we are not doing enough research on how do we decolonize and how do we pluralize our analytics. Because if we don't pluralize the analytical part, then the communal knowledge, it keeps being treated as descriptive. They're just describing things that we can tack on somewhere, but they are not I would say they are not a foundational part of the knowledge production process. They are sort of tangential, they're adjacent. Oh, it's something that, we can send like two people to the village 3 days from now. They'll tell us when the apple trees are flowering. Okay, I'm glad that you have this knowledge. How are you then, in many ways, ensuring the sanctity of that knowledge, right? So it's like indigenous or communal knowledge has to have an indigenous or communal form of analytical framing, right? So it's not enough that we now have data, right, which is probably different from, let's say, gathering pH data of a stream. But then what do I do with that? And that I feel is a question of epistemic justice, right? Because the way in which we ensure data sovereignty, or the way in which we ensure that communal knowledge is not extracted or mistreated, is by ensuring that we don't force that communal knowledge to conform to whatever, let's say, analytical box you've created without the design input of those communities. So, which is sort of point two, right? Like if we are now designing this larger, methodological frame, how do I do this research, right? Let's say I want to do this same report, right? This long-term risk assessment around what would happen if the Western Himalayan glaciers shrank. I would like to see, because it doesn't exist in this report, I would like to see a communal scale risk assessment map, right? We don't have that. We don't have that in our state plans. We definitely don't have that at the national level. And some, NGOs maybe are attempting to challenge ideas, challenge conceptions like that. But again, what ends up happening is that because we fundamentally have a hierarchical society, many kinds of knowledges are not seen as very valid, right? So let's say, for example, if I walk into a lower caste, an SC Tok, SC area of a village in Uttarakhand, and I talk to the women, they know so much more about woodworking, right? So they can tell me the way in which the changes in the winter snow has actually altered the density of deodar wood, right? And therefore, the that wood is a lot more susceptible to borers, right? They can tell me that just by hearing how the wood sounds when they hammer it, right? But this kind of knowledge is not seen important because to an upper caste person, the wooden house itself is the problem, right? We don't want the wooden house. Why do you want the wooden house? The wooden house is a sign of being a savage. The wooden house is a sign of being stuck in the past. We want a house made of rebar and cement, right? So along with uh, along with this hegemony, right, of expert knowledge, we also have the hegemony of caste, which is a much more ancient, hierarchical system, and we have the hegemony of patriarchy, right? And all of these sort of intersect to create this perfect storm where we are consistently looking um, to often Western trained folk and as well as Western scientists as well, right? Some of the early risk assessments done for creation of the state action plans in the Himalayan region, it was all done with Swiss aid or German aid or UK aid. And if you see the kind of tools, the knowledge production tools used in these reports, they are deeply, I would say, limiting when it has to capture this hyper complexity of the mountain terrain, when it has to kind of not just consider the material realities, right? So, for example, if you have indicators, right, macroinvertebrates or pH values or total dissolved solids, fine, that's good. You have, machinery that can capture that. But then how do you capture spirits and your ancestors? How do you capture the relational indicators of how people connect to water and what that water actually means and how it connects to reproduction and intergenerational stories? None of those indicators were there, right? If those indicators are not there, and this is not just some kind of a semantic point, right? I'm not trying to say that, oh, well, it would be a good thing to have. No, no, no. It's not a good thing to have. You're actually presenting a partial view of reality. And because you're presenting a partial view of reality, you're actually failing to convey the risk of whatever it is that you think is going to happen in this community. So on one hand, we have a industry of, I would say, solutionism, which is being driven by a lot of big banks, huge climate finance agencies. But on the other hand, we also have this real massive issue around the production of knowledge when it comes to climate science, which again has been, and this is not just limited to India. This exists almost everywhere. We've done work on it to show how the IPCC itself barely has, it has like under 2% indigenous knowledge when we looked at the 100,000 citations it has in its last report. So the problem is actually global, and the problem stems back to the fact that what do we consider to be valid knowledge, and then how are we actually engaging um, different kinds of knowledges in the actual analytics, right? In the creation of the frameworks, in the creation of the methodologies, and in the creation of the knowledge itself, and not just plugging in communal knowledge here and there wherever we can as a tokenistic form of, box checking.
Right.
Sorry, over to you, Mansi. That was a bit long.
Mansi, would you want to carry forward with the same question, or I have a related question, but you can answer this to begin with as well.
Maybe you can, kind of add, and then I'll kind of
Yes.
consolidate. That will be good.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So I was also thinking, so how can, these kind of top-down responses that, affect the ways in which communities have traditionally, say, managed disasters and their own resources, and when does responding to a disaster also create opportunities for outside actors to benefit from it?
Yeah. So I think the question of knowledge and knowledge as a whose knowledge is considered as valid, and who's not, and of course who's producing the knowledge, and also in terms of how does it feed into decision making, into and it's directly also connected with resource governance and resource ownership. So I think that it's very difficult to separate the question of knowledge from the question of ownership of resources or governance of the landscape. And in the case of the Himalayan region, and specifically looking at water, if we look at, I mean, climate change has not is never entering an empty landscape, right? It's a very I mean, it's very complex. You have complex socio-ecological systems, and water, or the the geohydrological or the hydromorphological regimes are in the Himalayan region complex. Then there are the the political issues, the economic issues, the social issues. So and the entire climate solutionism is just, as far as disasters are concerned, for instance floods, are looking at these hazards as events, as one-time events, and rather than historical processes, rather than complex compounding processes, which also include, for instance, in a valley, how the land use has changed. If you have in the Himalayan region now, in especially in the Western Himalaya, you have a cascade of dams in valleys, so that is directly, impacting the river environmental flows. It's impacting the flooding regimes, etc. How flooding happens, how flooding traditionally happened, where did people which areas would people use for farming traditionally, what was grown there and what is being grown there now. Like, you have more of horticulture and commercial farming happening in the valley fields, which was not the case before. So what I'm trying to say is that I think that complexity gets entirely missed out in the climate solutions, which are again top down. I wanted to give a couple of examples. For instance, because about floods. Himachal Pradesh, for instance, has seen consecutive floods, large-scale disasters in like valleys like the Beas, for instance, over the last 3-4 years. And dredging is one of the solutions. River channelization, river training is one of the solutions that the government is, looking at to build climate resilience. Now, dredging itself is just, dredging the sediment off the river bank and putting it elsewhere. And most of the time, it's piled on the sides. And when the river floods again, it is causing more damage. If you look at the kind of river channelization, which is basically building embankments on both sides of the river, which flows in like in a changing the natural flow to a straighter kind of flow, so that the highways don't get disturbed, or the tourism that is there on on both sides of the bank doesn't get disturbed, etc. So again, this is something that has downstream impacts, because you're hastening the flow of the river. And a river is not just water. Again, that entire perspective which looks at river, which misses the sediment as important part of the river, and how that sedimentation or the muck in the river, which is increasing because of construction, how what kind of impact that has downstream, etc. And these are some of the solutions that are being proposed in the wake of disasters. The other thing that we see is, for instance, with irrigation channels, where you have concretization of earth channels. So these were irrigation channels that were made of earth before, and now mud and earth. They were managed by a system of cool committees at the local level, which are basically, of course, mostly men in the village, but and landed men who are part of these committees. So caste and gender are very much part of the what Ritodi also spoke about, the fractures which are evident in many of the local systems. But it was an entirely locally managed system, which with Japanese funding has now shifted to concretization of the irrigation channels, which again then and like again Ritodi said that the climate vocabulary of climate adaptation is being sprinkled on these interventions, which were anyway happening as part of the, let's say, the irrigation and public health department and the bilateral funding it was getting. It now has the language of climate resilience, climate adaptation being used. And a very interesting incident happened 2 years ago, when I met somebody from the Department of Science and Technology, which actually hosts the climate action, the climate cells that are made at the state level, the climate knowledge and action cells that are made at the state level under the Himalayan mission of sustaining Himalayan ecosystems, which is a climate action mission, which started in 2014. It's the only geographic mission of all the missions. I think there are 12, and it has some six task forces, and it's building these knowledge cells, climate knowledge cells across the Himalayan states. And what an engineer from the cell said, that their job is basically to guide different departments to classify their projects under adaptation, mitigation, knowledge production, etc., risk and resilience, governance, etc. So afforestation is something that the forest department, it's main kind of forestry is its main agenda, or it has been its main project for a long time, for many decades now. But now most of the climate adaptation, and there is another reducing ecological degradation, which is called RED, the RED program. All the afforestation programs are now being done as part of that. But the problem is that all these programs are, again, relying on the same institutional frameworks that were, like the joint forest management, or the older institutional frameworks where decision making is top down, where species selection is done on the basis of whether this will be grazed, where older enclosures are used, where people have lost access, to agropastoral landscapes, etc. So, in the name of resilience building, many of the projects are just reinforcing the older exclusions that we see, and that is, I mean, in the sector of water, we see that this is not addressing really the question of water governance. It's not addressing the crisis. It's basically just kind of coming up with band-aid solutions, like improving piped water supply. Or, for instance, there is Asian Development Bank funding for lift irrigation schemes, which is leading to conflict between upstream, downstream areas, because it means building storage structures or storage dams in the valley. So, again, we are going back to the dam building as a solution. I mean, the projects are also a climate mitigation strategy, are part of the energy transition. So the entire climate solutions ecosystem, in a way, is very much rooted in the neoliberal governance and development paradigm, in the neoliberal policy paradigm. And there, the role of the communities is not just missing, or I would not even say that create a binary between scientific knowledge and indigenous knowledge. I would say that indigenous knowledge is extracted where it's needed. For instance, if the government decides that sea buckthorn is marketable and they need to get in the private players, then the indigenous knowledge related to sea buckthorn in the Trans Himalaya is being extracted for companies, for how can it become, and it's being also kind of portrayed as something that will lead to gender empowerment. It will lead to, livelihood building. But it is essentially about financializing the forest and financializing, a particular species, putting it into the market. So, yeah, I would say that I don't know, I lost the train of thought, but I would say that I think that can probably take us to the next question um, of climate finance and
Yes.
where it is going. So I think I've already entered that terrain, but yes.
Yes. Thanks, Manshi. Ritudi, if you don't have something to add to this, I would want to club it with the question I have about climate finance.
let's do that. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I mean, you all have been talking about this. So now that we think about this, so when we follow the money, like who is it that then who actually benefits from these climate interventions, and how do funding priorities and the conditions that are attached to climate finance influence what then happens in the local community and the environment?
Yeah, this is again a multi-trillion dollar question, so to speak. Um, I was just thinking about, two things. One is that Isimod just published this report on the climate finance gap across the Himalaya, right? And their calculations shows that we are missing $12 trillion. Now, these kinds of numbers, first off, are I'm not really sure what the point is of coming up with a calculation like that, other than sort of essentially trying to create a bit of an emergency or trying to create a bit of a sensationalization around the needs, right, of climate change. I find it like really problematic that the data used to come up with numbers like this is often also sort of standardized across whoever is giving you the finance, right? So if the funder or the donor has a certain let's say assessment model that you're using to come up with whatever number that you're going to come up with, then that's what you're going to get. Now, and this may almost sound a little bit counterintuitive, but actually that saying numbers like that might actually be problematic for communities. Because, for example, right, like this $400 million project for Himachal from the World Bank, if you look at what it does, right, it does what Mansi is saying, right? It is money in the pockets of elites to then go ahead and focus on infrastructure development, to go on kind of use the language of emergency to suspend democratic rights, right? So it's like, look, we are in a climate emergency. We have all this money that has come in. What we are going to do is come up with forms of risk mitigation that have been handed to us as best practice. Now, whoever has handed this best practice, they could be engineers, they could be consultants, what have you, right? Now, money on that scale, right? Money on that on a scale that just is overwhelmingly big, like $400 million. It's sort of uh, in some ways it gives this appearance as if a lot of work is going to happen. But actually, a consultant's going to charge you $2,000 a day. So not much is going to happen because you're going to pay a lot of the money is going to get funneled back into the same people who are dispensing the funds, right? Another point to be made is that climate finance is a very interesting battleground in terms of thinking about global south, global north relations, right? Because it brings into sharp focus questions like colonization, questions like, this ongoing, I would say, challenges that like communities like the SIDS, where the small island nations are bringing up, saying that climate change is a direct result of colonization, therefore we are owed reparations. And I'm 100% supportive of initiatives like that, right? And that battlefield of, in many ways, getting, a bit of a drip back from the still ongoing conveyor belt of colonial capitalism that's moving people, labor, resources from the global south to the global north, that's ongoing. But one of the nuances that have to be added right to that mix is that when this climate finance is dispersed, often the funders, they are unwilling to disperse any money unless they can see an institution that they can trust, right? Now, the institutions that they can trust are the institutions that look colonial, are the institutions that look European. And those institutions are not our village institutions, right? Because our village institutions are hyper plural, they're hybrid, they are dynamic, they are changing, they have way too much complexity. for a funder to have faith that the money that they are giving could finally be audited, right? So the question then becomes, what is climate finance actually for, right? Is climate finance actually to address the very real impacts of climate change, which then you can start when you can have that question, right? What are those very real impacts, right? In which ways is it affecting people? So, like, for example, I would say, well, we know for certain, right, that we have had a seasonal shift in precipitation in the Western Himalaya, which means the winter precip is now coming in the spring. So then why are we pushing horticulture across the region when all of those plants flower in the spring? And when you're going to get those hailstorms, it's going to decimate the apple, the cherry, all of those fruit trees that are going to flower in just in that post-winter time when you're going to get those big storms, right? So how can we then help mitigate some of those risks to some of these growers, right? Is the solution some kind of a climate insurance? Is the solution, maybe divesting out of, putting all your eggs in the horticultural basket? I don't know. But clearly, a giant climate infrastructural plan, which may be building all-weather roads, that suits the needs of a geopolitical anxiety-driven nation, right? We have to be on the borders to ensure that we can protect our borders, right? So one of the things that we have to understand is that, and this is maybe my second point about the climate finance thing, is that in the Himalayan region, climate finance is intimately and very deeply involved with militarization, with securitization, and with, this whole geopolitical governance of the borderlands. And whether or not we understand how insidiously this is being done, or whether or not we think this is the way we should be going in terms of governance, that is going to happen, right? And we are already seeing research come out of this from Nepal, where the vital infrastructures of climate solutions, they are being protected by the army, right? So the army is actually coming in and protecting those infrastructures and like at the cost of communal lives and livelihoods, right? And more that is going to happen. And that's a form of green capture. That's a form of, again, using climate change as a blanket to cover all of our sins, right? It's like, well, we have floods in the lower delta. Yes, of course, you have a upper delta barrage of 800 dams in the eastern Himalaya. Of course, it's flooding, right? Of course, the siltation that is again, the silt that is being stuck behind all of these big sluice gates, it's stopping, let's say, replenishment of the estuarine region of the Bengal Delta. Of course, that land is subsiding. So we could be having that conversation about hydropower. We could be having that question about what we are willing to sacrifice for the, development of cheap energy. But instead, no, let's kind of say everything is related to climate change and use the climate solutions industry to then perpetrate the same exact things that we were wanting to do in the first place, only now it's morally as well as ethically as well as financially viable. So this is sort of where we are.
Can I come in here? Yeah, I think the geopolitics is a very critical point in the case of Himalayan climate finance, and the mission that I was speaking about earlier, the National Himalayan Sustaining Himalayan Ecosystems Mission. We had tried to access how the finance is being used, what are the expenditures made, what is the division of the budgets between the six task forces, and what are the different states getting, etc. What is the money being spent on? And the right to information application, of course, was stonewalled, and the information was denied. And finally, after a period of 2 years, when it reached the Central Information Commission, the denial was upheld on the grounds of it being a strategic issue. I mean, I think that this is strategic information that is cannot be made public because it's a strategic region, and that is the that is the gaze towards this towards the Himalaya, and the climate securitization is something that is something that we see growing across we see it across sectors. The other point that Ritodi made about institutional investment, like where is the bilateral funding going, and that these institutions being colonial, and it is essentially sustaining the departments or those bureaucracies themselves. Like the forest department, for instance, is the highest recipient of funding for afforestation projects or livelihood generation projects around forests, watershed management projects, and the forest department is, for instance, one of the laws that recognizes forest rights, the Forest Rights Act. It has been actively in regions like Himachal or even in Uttarakhand and the other parts in the other mountain states. It has been actively kind of advocating against this law, or posing hurdles to the implementation of this law, because there is apparently the fear that it will destroy the forests, because these forests are these are the grounds. I mean, these are the kind of grounds where the climate finance is coming in. So the forest department does not obviously want to part with the ownership of forests in the region. Similarly, you have agriculture as another field which is which is a recipient for climate finance. There's water, and then there's health. But again, the solutions are like insurance or new kind of hybrid crops, or horticulture of a certain kind. um, the question is that, I mean, even if we were to assume that, okay, I mean, one is the politics of the climate finance itself, but where the finance is actually needed, for instance, if you look at the impacts of the disasters in whether it's in Himachal or in other Himalayan states, loss of land is one of the biggest, and housing, that is habitation, is one of the biggest impacts of flood, landslide disasters. What the government is showing is that, oh, we've reduced the fatalities because we've mastered rescue operations, we have mastered recovery. But the question of rehabilitation, the question of actually, building back for the communities, recovery for the communities and their livelihoods, that remains unaddressed. The compensations are not forthcoming right now, and the insurance. I mean, the loans taken by the farmers or the horticulturists. They have to pay back those loans, and many communities are now, under severe debt. I mean, these issues remain unresolved. These issues are not being attended to, and this is a kind of a climate injustice, a disaster injustice, that we are not putting our fingers on. The entire focus is on um, knowledge production, climate modeling, predicting the hazards, and early warning systems. Within the early warning systems are, also catering to the hydropower dams, because they want sensors. They are the ones who are getting the sensors fixed. So I think that there's a need to uh, kind of bring the conversation back to the climate impacts, the real impacts that are happening. And it's not just climate change, it is development induced disasters. It is policy induced disasters. It is a failure of governance in multiple sectors. Not again, when we talk about the water sector, we tend to isolate, but water is directly connected with land use, especially spring water in the Himalayan region. So we'll need to expand the conversation beyond water as a sector and beyond just water supply and piped water supply, and talking about that as climate resilience or climate adaptation.
Thanks, Manshi and Rituvi. Also, it's already 4, so I just have to end on a hopeful note. I just have one last question. And Mansi, would you want us to open the floor to questions, or one last question is fine for you?
Please continue with your question, and then I have already put in the message box that participants
Okay.
are requested.
Okay.
And I see Deepak Gayawali sir is there, so it will be nice to have him in the
Okay.
conversation. Yeah. Oh,
So
go ahead.
I think I would begin with Manshi actually. So I mean, what do you think then would a genuinely community-led and ecologically sound approach look like? If you were to approach Himalayan water governance in this region, then
Yeah, again, I mean, so I think that it every region, I mean, like something that Ritodi said earlier, I also emphasize that Himalaya are so diverse. Every altitudinal zone, every, which part of the Himalaya, every ecological zone has its own, peculiarities. And there are different diverse communities within within these regions who are dependent on the landscape. I think that, one is consultative processes or governance, which is decentralized, decision making, which is decentralized, and kind of strengthening constitutional mechanisms and legal mechanisms, which, which kind of get the communities on board in all these kind of processes. Also, we need to like see more closely about how it's not like communities are not responding or that they are victims only. They are actually in the first line of response, and there are decisions that are actively being taken, like community is already exercising agency, whether it is in forest protection measures, whether it is post disaster, like the immediate first line of response, rebuilding of bridges. We've seen it in Sikkim, for instance, when the GLOF happened and the traditional bridges using bamboo and cane were rebuilt, so that the relief could reach the villages. Whether it is like with springs, for instance. If you look at, we've done some work with the youth in Kinnaur where we looked at springs, which are called nagas, where they've kind of, I mean, that one, it is directly connected with their DTs, local DTs. There's also like duties distributed within the community about keeping the area clean, or what kind of land use will happen upstream of those regions where the springs are. The entire No Means No campaign against hydropower projects in this region has, I mean, it raised the issue of landslides, disasters, and the exacerbation of different kinds of hazards. But the other main issue was the drying up of springs because of the tunneling work and the disturbance of the geohydrological regimes. So I think that there are various different kind of different knowledges, or different experiential learnings that the communities are putting out, like with in the post disaster scenario, in many of the regions, communities have resolved against pilgrimages or large scale pilgrim tourism. In Kinnaur, it has happened for the Kinnaur Kailash Yatra. It's happened in the Beas Valley. It's happening in, I mean, this dialogue is there in many other regions. So bringing that kind of dialogue into the mainstream decision making, that is one. The other is also sharing of information. I think that what I was saying earlier, that it's not a question of climate science versus indigenous knowledge. There's a lot of information on, let's say, geological mapping, landslide inventories, hazard vulnerability maps are generated, are now being generated even at the micro level. Where is this data? Why is it not being shared with the communities? Why is there no, a mechanism for communities to get involved in land use planning in their own regions? Because ultimately it's where the water and sediment flows that determines. So if the community can, if there is an exercise of participatory land use mapping and planning within very very small water catchments in different areas, there's a lot that can happen. I mean, I'm not saying that there aren't. Again, I want to bring back the conversation on the fractures within community, and the and many of these where we see the involvement of the local DTs, we also see that the conversation veers to um, more of kind of jingoistic or conservatism of a certain kind, especially in Hindu majoritarian areas. Certain communities get excluded as a result. These are issues that are real, and they need to also kind of be spoken about. But yeah, I think that there is a need for more democratic, decentralized, decolonized approaches.
Thanks, Manshi. Rituti, I would give you a minute to conclude with any remarks that you might have for the
No,
same
I
question.
think
And
that was really great, Nancy. You gave so many wonderful points and ways ahead. I would say just two small things. One is that, more and more we tend to think about climate solutions as a form of DRR, right? Disaster risk and resilience. I think this is a huge problem, right? Those are, if we start thinking of all of climate adaptation and the disaster risk management as two circles that are completely overlaid on each other, then we are going to run into that form of disaster capitalism, disaster, anti-democratization that we see everywhere. And this sort of like emergency-driven planning, emergency-driven resource capture. So I think that is very important, and we see that at the community level, where people really push back against this sort of disasterization of climate impacts, or thinking about their lives as going from one disaster to the next, right? That's one thing, right? The other thing is that I think, and again, this is a maybe a point that's a bit counterintuitive, is that if we want climate adaptation to happen that is actually meaningful, then we need to stop centering climate change, right? It's kind of a maybe counterintuitive way to think about it. But if we instead center justice and well-being and address, let's say, historical problems around all of those things, right? Around sovereignty, around communal management of resources, around things like, for example, I feel, you know, it could be so helpful if young people start working on things like this. The fact that the rural household is no longer limited by the boundaries of the village, right? The rural household today is stretched, at least in a place like Uttarakhand, to the small town nearby where the kids study, to the city where the men work, to the, maybe overseas where they go on small stints. So the household has this spatial characteristic that's very fluid and that's very open, right? In many ways, this is mobility. And what we see historically is mobility is one of the biggest, uh, I would say, assets that families have against changes in social ecological systems, right? What we have as a key issue across the Himalaya is the forever, I would say, decreasing space of mobility. First, by our geopolitical tensions. Second, by this, ever increasing presence of the state in all of it, right? In governance, in food production, in tourism, right? There's a huge presence of the state, right? To the point where, let's say, if I enter in Uttarakhand today and talk to people about medicinal plants, they'll be like, oh, yeah, well, we used to have 6 people, but now all of them work for Baba Ramdev, right? They go to Hardwar and they supply them with, Gandreni or, Shilajit. And I was like, whoa, so you're telling me that medicinal plant knowledge is being passed, but it's being passed to an external agent who's then, extracting that for incredible amounts of money. So I think like that point really needs to be thought of, that climate is really not the main issue here. It should be treated as something that is amplifying ongoing unresolved issues of power.
Thanks, Rituvi. I will let Mansi conclude now.
Yes.
Thanks, both of you.
Thank you so much, Nilanjana, for taking the session forward. We have questions on YouTube, so the session is still not over. So Ritodi and Manshi, please stay there. And I'm just quoting the questions from the YouTube. And I know that Nilanjana, you have to drop out. So I must say again, a big thanks to run this show so smoothly, and you made
Thank
my
you.
life easy. So let me
Thank you
just
so
take the
much.
questions we have from Amitangshu Acharya. And it's question to either of you. In the Western Himalayas, if either Manshi or Ritodik cite any examples of any respectful engagement with plural knowledges with communities which has had to co-production of adoption and infrastructure. I'm copy pasting the question also in the chat box for your ease in Zoom. But if you have got the question and if you can see, how would you like to answer it? Yeah, who wants to go for it? The question is, I'm just posting it there.
I mean, I would like to give the example of watermills, for instance, and multifunction watermills, and the revival of watermills as as a kind of a one, reviving the traditional knowledge around it, but also the governance of the resource. In Uttarakhand, watermills are a collective resource at the community level. At the in Himachal, they are more individually owned, like owned by farmers as individuals. But in both places, there have been efforts, and also to make some of these watermills multifunctional. For instance. Have an oil expelling unit, as well as a flour mill, as well as a wool carding machine attached to it. And I think that this is something that, it kind of brings on board different kinds of communities, because the material used to build these watermills is also much of the local wood species are used to create the channel, to create the turbines. How can they be made more efficient with the use of maybe some metals, amalgamating different kinds of sciences there. So I think that there has been, that is one example that immediately came to mind. With protection of forests, I think there have been various initiatives also around strengthening of one panchayats, democratization of one panchayats in Uttarakhand, which of course has a lot of challenges. It's not like, I mean, I wouldn't romanticize or glorify one panchayats, but it has happened. Similarly, in Himachal, there are examples of let's say that forest protection measures in we've seen it in the Trans-Himalayan region, where women or Mahila Mandals have kind of taken a lead on protection of the juniper plants, because it's a sacred plant, as a sacred tree, as well as it's seen as an avalanche breaker. So post avalanches that took place in the late 70s, there have been some initiatives there. So I think that there are, but I would also like kind of, yeah, I mean, we should be cautious about glorifying a single initiative as being the perfect, but I think that dialogue between these different initiatives, and what can be learned from them, and what kind of work can be done in different places, depending on um, depending on this, on the very, very kind of local circumstances.
Thanks, Manshi. I will pose the second question also, and Ritudi, you may then go further and take both the questions or separate as you wish to. The next question is from Dr. Shishir Rawal from US, otherwise from Baroda. And he, first of all, appreciated both of you for, all three of you, for your wonderful conversation. And then he has posed a question. I wonder if they can share their view on which kind of top 5 experts should be part of an empowered team working to understand and address these wicked problems. And the second question, I think it can be clubbed as I can understand. Is the focus on resilience appropriate in every such discussions? Ritudi, and then maybe Manshi can close. Yeah.
No, I think that's a great question. So we've been working on this, me and the Knowledge Justice Collective, on understanding how do we maybe in some ways horizontalize knowledge production, but also essentially create regulatory system, right? Because the problem is we hear a lot of this word integration, and I am a huge anti-integration person. I am all for knowledge segregation. And the reason for that is whenever you have a collective and you have one entity that is much stronger than the rest, what's going to happen is that stronger entity is going to consume everything else. And so we can't have knowledge integration without equity. First, we have to have some kind of equality across whoever is part of the collective. Then we can think about integration. So I would say, like to get to that question around experts, um, the IPBES, right? The biodiversity, international collective we have, they are miles ahead of the IPCC when it comes to the creation of plural knowledge systems, right? And I understand to an extent it's because so much of the focus has been on conservation, so much of the focus has been on land. Um, but that being said, across the Himalaya, or let's say we stay with the Himalaya, let's say if we think about experts or expertise, part of it, what we have to kind of figure out is, are they very distinctive, intersectional, right? This word really matters, intersectional uh, kinds of subjects that exist in these spaces. So, for example, when I was doing like this last stint, even when I was in Pahad in Uttarakhand, one of the things I've always said is that, the person who is the most sort of vulnerable to any kind of micro or macro social ecological shocks, they are lower caste widows. Lower caste widows I mean, widows in general in villages are thrown outside, right? So you have your area of the village which is cursed. They live there. It's got the worst access. It's got often no access to electricity. It's just a really sad existence, right? But along with it being a sad existence, you can kind of see how they exist at the intersection of everything that is problematic with that power hierarchy, right? There's caste, there's gender, there's age. Often many of them are quite old. There's disability. Um, my point is that, right, at the end of the day, and maybe this can go to that second question, this if we are thinking about team building, right, team building then has to be done keeping in mind not just production of knowledge, but also essentially regulation of whatever team it is that we build. How are we going to ensure power equity within the team? And then finally, the team itself, what is the goal? Is the goal here to achieve maybe an overarching atlas of climate society relationships? Or is the goal here to come up with a set of tools, right? Mechanisms like decision support systems, monitoring and evaluation systems, carbon justice protocols. Now I'm using words that consultants use, right? And this is
Yes.
important because often consultants come into these communities and say, oh, you guys don't know all this. This is stuff that we
Mhm.
understand. No, no, no. They know all those things. It's just that you are using a vocabulary that is making them feel as if this is something very advanced, but it's really not. So the question then becomes, and this is a very good question, should we focus on resilience? And I am not a huge fan of that word. I would use well-being like 9 times
Mm.
out of 10, because resilience is a very has been weaponized really well by governments, by top-down organizations. In many ways, what they do is they use resilience to pass accountability on to the community. They say, you are resilient, you can handle it. Oh, here's a flood, here's something else. You say, oh, well, we don't want to, you are right. We agree that you are not vulnerable, you're not a victim, you are resilient, you got this, you can deal with this. But the issue is that, again, if you break down that word community, you see that the resilience is supposed to be held by women, right? Like even within the community, it is the women who do the labor of material reproduction post-disaster. It is the women that are directly engaged, right, with natural resource intensive livelihoods. If I walk into a village in Uttarakhand, who is getting the grass for buffaloes, who is like harvesting, who is taking care of the apple orchards? It's all women, right? Because the men are in Delhi and Dehradun and Andaman, cooking, whatever, cleaning, working in DRDO offices. So my point is that resilience can be then used in a very negative way, to kind of pass on the buck to the community and say it's your problem. You're resilient, you're strong, you deal with it.
Hmm. Very well put. And this will be the last question, I promise, but I cannot avoid
Mansi,
having this question.
can I
Yes,
just
you will
add to
add.
the
I will bring
resilience?
you in
Yeah,
because
yeah.
then I will let Stacey's question come in, so you can wrap all the questions and it will be the closing remark. So we have our young researcher from Africa, so Nairobi. Stacey, would you please pose your question? Because it's always good to have a young person saying something. And Mansi, please wrap up everything. Okay? Yeah. Whatever Rithodi was adding, and then whatever Stacey wants to ask. Go ahead, Stacey.
Okay, so my question was, how can we distinguish between a genuine climate solution and a technological or an infrastructure-based intervention that simply shifts water-related risks from one community or ecosystem to another?
Yeah. Manshi.
Yeah, I think that, we've been generally in this session critical of the idea of climate solution itself, and also critical of expertise. So, in response to both those questions, I would say that, for instance, would we look at women demanding access to land, access to forests, ownership over water resources, or Dalits demanding access to land? Do we see these as climate solutions? But I mean, they could become part of climate solutions in quotes. So I think that, yeah, the question is that how do we address, I mean, if there is any initiative that is addressing something structural within, and where is that the demand for that structural shift coming from? For instance, I would say that the movement in Ladakh for the sixth schedule
Yes.
is seen as a strategy to also deal with climate issues, a strategy towards climate justice. So, yeah, but yeah, but we'll never call it a climate solution, right? Because the climate solution is the mega solar power project that is being proposed in that region by Adani, whereas the movement is kind of saying that we don't want this mega solar power project because it's going to just add to the warming in the region, or it's going to add to the water crisis in the region and is not a real solution, etc. So I think that we need to look beyond solutionism and expertise and look at the more structural issues. And on resilience, I really wanted to say this because, I mean, one is that it's passing the buck and passing the, burden of coping with disasters or crises on the most people who are most impacted by it. But it's also it's a smoke screen, because you will have the same communities being called encroachers and criminalized, that they are squatting on land, or you'll have the bulldozers run over their homes, saying that they are in the unsafe zone, they are in the disaster zone, that they have occupied the wrong lands, etc. So that they are in the forests, without tenure, without title. So I think that, again, it's a very, my research going forward is going to be on this, that you have encroached, you are telling people they are the custodians of forests, you are telling people they are the resilient subjects, and then you are also calling them encroachers, and you're saying that their livelihoods are not resilient enough, or that they are damaging to the resources, and therefore there needs to be a shift, and they need to adapt. So it's a very paradoxical kind of language that is used, and it's yeah, this kind of neoliberal resilience governance also needs to be questioned.
Yeah. Thank you so much, both Ritudi and Manshi, for this wonderful conversation. I think this is rare that I am not asking a question, but I will hold my emotions because we are running really long, late in this conversation. But very important pick from the session today, these diverse social ecological systems and shocks are actually subject to geopolitical situations, and the very well put today, the way we have to look beyond solutionism, and importantly structural solutions, and looking at community at the core. And very well put towards the end by Manshi, that the very community we talk about itself is always subject to scrutiny, and it is conveniently used sometimes as victim, sometimes as resilient, sometimes as dissenters, and sometimes as they are unaffected, and different ways. And I think very well put by Ritodi, that their knowledge is often in a descriptive way, and it falls out when we talk about putting things together in the jargons of scientific and technical and consulting way of doing things. And I think many more, we have to really see how we can bring the community knowledge and community at the core of this discussion. And I always feel that it goes back to the way democracy is held in a country, or in a way we run the democracy. I think Manshi and I can go on and on talking about it. It's not only Himalayan region, but it's everywhere, how we deal with our citizenry and how we deal with the politics around it. And talking about Himalaya, there's always this securitization of climate solutions, which really plays a big role than the solution and the climate itself. There is always this big question on security issues. Whose security? That's a different question we can talk about some other time. I wish Deepak was also here, because he would have jumped into this conversation, but we had him recently as a speaker. Thank you so much, both of you, once again. Before I let everyone go, I would also like to announce the wonderful sessions which are coming up this Friday, day after. We have Friday Waters Thesis Club on August 21 at 6 p.m. IST. For some reasons, because again of the time issues, we have a session on narratives of water security, a comparative study of China and India. Remember, Thesis Club is always with PhD scholars and postdocs. They present a detailed investigation of their work. It's a wonderful way to discuss with them, and it's formatted in a jury format. Next week, Wednesdays for Water, we continue the conversation as we did today, and we go to the Assam floods, and the session is on August 26th at 5 p.m. IST. Wonderful speakers, straight from the ground, those ground researchers, reporters. We talk about how flood shapes Assam. All the information will be available on our website, www.w4w.org, as well as we have 2 homes right now, but slowly we are in transition to converting it into an institution. That's why we are in 2 homes. Thanks, all of you. Please take care of yourself. See you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thanks a
Thank
lot,
you.
Mansi. Thanks,
Thank
everybody.
you. Bye-bye.